May the force be with you is a phrase used to wish a person well to overcome a challenge. The invitation in this podcast, May the life force be with you, is to explore what it means to truly feel alive, to appreciate the physical, emotional, and spiritual connection to our energy, and finally to understand how this impacts who you are and all that you do. May this conversation inspire you to thrive. This episode of May the Life Force Be With You is brought to you by Moment Company and the Moment Pebble. The Moment Pebble is a beautiful, natural stone, light-guided breathing device and is a unique gift for someone who needs that gentle reminder to stop and take a break, to take moments throughout their busy day and to practice mindfulness. Just head over to momentcompany.co, that's momentcompany.co, and enter the code LIFEFORCE at checkout to receive an exclusive 10% podcast discount. Hi. Sorry, I just had a message flash up on my screen telling me something wasn't accessible on my laptop, and I thought, here we go again. Because today we are bringing back Elaine to talk to us, where last time, it's fair to say, we had some technical challenges. And then today, part two, we've had an amazing array of technical challenges here. And what is it, Karila, your guides say?
So my guides have this thing where they're like, the bigger the resistance, the more transformation. Like when there's resistance, it's like, they're like, it's the arrow going back because there's about to be like accelerated transformation. And technical issues are a form of resistance. And so I'm so excited about the transformation part two.
That means we're going to have some pretty profound conversation this afternoon is what you're telling us, right? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, like part one wasn't profound, you know. It was amazingly profound. I just want to introduce Elaine. So if you're listening to part two without listening to part one, Elaine is an energy and body worker working in the realms of sexuality, breathwork, shamanism, energy, pleasure, spirituality, and soul. As I said in part one, she has taught all over the world, held space all over the world. And, you know, I meet people all the time who have been held by her, and all of them have so much reverence and respect. As I said, she's like the most respected space holder that I know. And so I knew the conversation was going to be powerful. I knew it was going to be profound. I knew it was going to be deep. I knew it was going to be activating. And that is exactly what it was. And actually, I would like us to start with kind of what happened, because you know, we were talking about shame. We were talking about what happens in your energy, and then suddenly, and we were talking about power, and then suddenly there were these situation. There was this technical situation that kind of almost activated all of that in a way. So, Fiona.
Well, yeah. The minute you said, you know, solar plexus being like the root of all of the shit, I put my hand up to say that is me, that is my challenge, and then that was it. I lost my voice after that, which then made me feel extremely vulnerable. I was really triggered because I felt I was watching on the outside of the conversation, and I had this whole thing about not having a voice, which then I think reactivated everything that we'd been talking about. It was quite a strange experience.
And I was trying to kind of like include you by looking at you every now and again and looking at your lips moving, but also like knowing, okay, we're carrying on with this conversation in some way. Then when you started translating, it reminded me of being in places in the world, you know, where you can't speak the language and you have to like ask someone else, or you have to get your phone and do Google Translate. Mm-hmm. It was this kind of circuit going around. And I've had, you know, now and again, small things, but not really any issues with my internet. And so it was very bizarre that it kind of, and then today, you know, another 20 minutes of technical resistance to get here. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for your resilience.
Yeah. Sometimes.
What you bring us, Elaine? I mean, like this level of resistance, it's like, what wisdom? Because, you know, when I say it was activating, like the conversation, there were so many things you said, But the thing for me that just, you said safety is a form of pleasure, and suddenly my whole trauma body went, what? Like, what? This thing that has been something that I haven't maybe had very much of when I was younger. It was so huge, and it led to such a profound few days of re-examining what safety means for me. Like I would say it was like a pivotal activation in my life, that one sentence. And so the resistance is understandable because
and safety is such a kind of judged word at times, a misunderstood word at times. We have this idea, and you'll know, of being in the world of transformation, where people are sometimes like, oh, they're so safe and full of fear, or they're so reckless and so courageous. There can be this judgment around safety. In fact, in life, people probably equate it to boring at times, when in fact, if we don't have safety in the body, it's very hard to fully experience anything else, and definitely pleasure. So the 8-level model that I work with pleasure, safety is the first thing we do. And out of a group of 40 odd people, at least a half, if not more, 3/4, they realize in that moment that is a fundamental issue, that actually they don't feel safe in their body, or maybe only under certain circumstances at certain times, but there's no way to access that. And we spoke a lot about codependency and externalization of pleasure. And so then this comes in there, where people are looking around for someone else to make them feel safe. Mm-hmm. And of course, no one can ever do that for us if on the inside we don't have that in us. So, and it's understandable that we don't have that in us, because often we had experiences when we were young that were imprints of not safety. And maybe those were just mild things and mild moments, or maybe those were huge, significant life events. So we have this idea that if there's not an imminent danger of a tiger in the room, we should feel safe, and we can judge ourselves for not feeling safe. And we can pretend to others that we are, because there's a lot of shame around, I should feel safe because I'm a grown adult and there's no real danger, but I don't. And this, again, comes down to programming of the nervous system and our capacity to be in recovery, and the fact that most people are working almost, half the time, if not more than half the time, on a survival level of adrenaline activation without even realizing it. It's become so normal to be in a bit of a state of hypervigilance.
Fiona, can I ask, because obviously to me the solar plexus is connected to safety. Why did you put your hand up in episode 1 when we talked about power in the solar plexus and safety? What made you do that then took away your voice?
So two reasons. Well, actually, two circumstances that are connected that led me to do that. The first was during my ayahuasca journey, I did a massage session with an amazing massage therapist, and he was like, it's your solar plexus, everything is blocked here. And he was almost like pulling all the bad relationships, all the bad kind of thoughts that I'd had around myself and around, I guess, who I was in each of those kind of circumstances. And oh my gosh, it was so painful for about 4 or 5 days after. I couldn't even touch that area. It was so activated. And then just recently, like a week or so ago, I had a kinesiology session. And again, it was all in my solar plexus. That was the blockage. That was where I was storing it all in the body. And that's where, when you said that was like the real sort of activation point, I'm like, yes, it is. Everything I do goes back to that area. And I can literally feel it. It's like I'm carrying a ball around of all the kind of mixed up emotions and past thoughts and beliefs that I've been holding on to. And that is the area that it gets triggered.
would you say that, because I often associate safety with the root, but like as Fiona's speaking, I'm like, maybe it's also in the solar plexus.
It's my kind of lens, and of course you can look at things through any lens depending on the experience, but my kind of lens is the solar plexus is tender and often unstable because that's where we've been and hit by experiences, which hits our power. So as experiences come to us and they hit our power, we take it here. But there's a very strong link between the solar plexus and the root and the base. So if I'm working with someone around safety, the first thing we go to is generally the base chakra and the connection to the earth and security. It's also money, abundance, many things there. But there seems to be this relationship where it's almost like when the wounding comes to the solar plexus, it almost like contracts the base up and unstabilizes the base. So to bring that back into balance, it's usually a combination of both bringing the root back down and regrounding it, and then looking at where is this sense of personal power? What do I need to do to recover from that assault, whatever that was, verbal, emotional, challenging circumstance in life?
I feel like a lot of it as well for me was connected to one of the things, and I think I talked about it when we talked about the ayahuasca, was that I was there to kind of understand or ask the question, like, who am I? Which I'm kind of like metamorphosizing out of a old world, corporate world. I'm still kind of in it, but I know that I'm on a different path and I'm just not quite sure of the footing of that. And so there's all these different beliefs that are swirling around. And I think there's something connected there around that. We talk about our core beliefs, and everything is kind of in that area as well. And when you're, I guess, challenging some old thought beliefs that have kept you safe, might not have been serving you, but they've made you feel safe. It's uncomfortable to kind of break out of that and try and do something different. And I think that's why everything's kind of knotted up there right now, because I'm keeping hold of some of the old stuff because it's familiar, but actually I'm deeply curious and want to keep traveling in another direction. And the two are kind of pushing and pulling against each other.
It's a totally. I love what you say about core belief. Because I've just been doing a load of channeling about the root chakra, and this is like channeled view of the root chakra, which in Sanskrit is called Muladhara. But what the guides say is that like the south pole of the root chakra is where it's where your trust is formed. So the very bottom of the root chakra is where you have your ability to have trust. And then the north pole of the root chakra is where your faith is formed, which is like and these are formed basically from the mother and the father. So the trust is the mother and the faith is the father. And then when they overlap, it's why that's relevant to May the Life Force Be With You, is when the trust is open, it's magnetic, and when the faith is on, it's electric, it's light. So mud, mul, light, la, and then actually what my guides say is the root can produce life force energy, it can produce prana when those two are fully balanced. And the beliefs that we have are at our core have life force energy running through them because the root can produce them. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
And so what your core beliefs are, then they shape. It's like a belief is something you're alive with, essentially.
Well, it gives you purpose, it gives you direction, it gives you a sense of self, it gives you, I say in my world, when I'm corporate mindfulness world, we say that it it guides you to what you do, who you hang out with, where you work, what you like, what you eat. It's all driven by beliefs, values, experience. And it could be from how you grew up, where you grew up, what your parents did, what your grandparents did, all have an influence on how then you, the things that you surround yourself, and then that then forms your belief patterns, then form how you actually interact with the world. So that's how I would kind of translate that in what I do, and how we look at how belief patterns kind of work. And then they impact your belief patterns, then impact your thoughts and feelings, which then impact your behavior and actions, which then reinforce your beliefs, and on round the merry-go-round we go.
When you said, Fiona, about the who am I, what came to me was, this for me, in my experience and my sense when I'm working with other people, when I'm feeling the solar plexus is really this place of personal will, personal power, and there's like an anchoredness. And it's interesting that it sits between the emotions, which can be trauma, and the heart, and so there's a connection can get very affected by instability underneath or instability above. But when you said, who am I, it was so interesting that for me, in terms of, and everyone has different views on the chakra system, but for me, the who am I is throat. And then you lost your voice.
Yeah.
So
these two for me are very connected. Yeah. My throat is,
And so it's like this thing of here, like, and who am I? And then the piece that actually is the thing of the expression of who I am kind of went. But you reminded me of an experience I had many years ago. One of the first sessions when I was in my life transitioning from being, 20 years working in clinical practice to changing my entire life, and everyone told me I was crazy. I was having a midlife crisis, that I was in grief, and I this was early on when I first learned the process of like aspecting, which is kind of like a Gestalt process where some people call it the third chair. But when you have an aspect of you on the pillow and you do a dialogue and you move between, it's very powerful. And the way that I've always done it, we combine it with emotional movement of the body, which I feel makes it much, much better.
Can you just explain that for anybody that is going, what do you mean, an aspect of you on
it? So essentially, there's a process for dealing with conflict or confusion within yourself or within yourself and someone else that sometimes is called voice dialogue, sometimes is called aspecting. It relates to a Gestalt process in the psychology world. Sometimes people call it the third chair, where you have someone. In terms of the shamanic way of working with this is actually to combine it with actually intending to channel in this other aspect, or call in this other person or this thing in your life. And you sit on one side of yourself and you speak and share. And then you move to the other side. You receive the words of the other person or the part of you. You process that and then you respond. And this can be a real way to look at confusion, conflict. I see it when I do it as beyond the mental teasing out of my own mind. I actually believe that I call the other being in, and often what I hear them say is not what I expect them to say. And that for me gives it a chance of being like very authentic, because I'm surprised rather than my story of how I think this conversation is going to go. So it's a process that I've used for years in my personal life to examine parts of myself.
And I always say at the time of transition. So you said as you were moving out of this very scientific mainstream background into what is a very, am I allowed to say, esoteric way of working?
I don't mind what you
energy, space hoarding, the work that you're doing, temple work.
I was put into this position to have this process. Okay. So I'm doing this process, and I am aspecting with the part of me that does not want to make that change. and the part of me that wants to and believes I need to make this change. So I'm in this moment in my life where part of me is going, you have, a good professional reputation, you have a great income, you have business practice. What are you doing? You're destroying your life. And as I stepped in to become the other part of me, like this, what I perceived then to be part of my ego that did not want me to let go of these things, I, the ego, stood over myself, me, the cushion, and what came down and grabbed me, the cushion, in my solar plexus and like held me like this and was like, you need me, you can't let this go. And it was like this incredible moment.
Yeah, I feel that there. I feel it in my throat when you say that. It immediately puts me in my throat.
Just because this is a podcast, like Elaine's like twisting. It's like a corkscrew on the pole.
We have a cushion. It like became like this, like grabbed.
No one sound effects. Kath needs to edit in a sound effect of like.
And in that moment, the witness in me kind of managed to zoom out and look at these two parts of myself and see this part of myself that was like trying to control and was in fear and was trying to like over dominate the part of me that was deciding, hey, I need to break free and change my life. Mm-hmm. So when you said this about the solar plexus and being in this part of your life, this image came to me, but it really helped me to understand and have less fear, have a little more compassion, give a voice to that part of me. And that's where aspecting or processes like that can be useful, because you can listen and say, hey, what do you need? Rather than just, I'm doing it. No, you're not. Yes, I am. No, you're not. It's like, okay, to that part of me that was trying to protect me from making what could have been a big mistake, and everyone was telling me was a big mistake, was actually becoming quite violent and dominating towards the other part of me, in order to try and keep me safe on some level.
I can feel that, and when you say it comes back to me about that safety, and what I've realized in my processing of all of that. I was looking for safety in the wrong places. And actually my voice now is a lot more vulnerable. I'm more able to say, not always in these exact words, but I don't feel safe, or that has triggered me, or this is not something that I'm comfortable with. And all of those things, the more I say that, the more I don't feel that I've lost something. I actually feel like I'm growing and gaining something by doing that, because I've got better. Because another word for safety, perhaps, which I know gets overused a lot, but it is boundaries. And I think that resetting of that boundaries and being able to say, no, that doesn't feel good, or no, that doesn't feel safe, has actually helped me grow into that more. And I feel that the safety comes from me now, and I was looking for it through validation, or as you said, other people or other situations. But actually, I've realized now the only person that can make me feel like that is me.
Yeah. And it's true that, sometimes, even we can't keep ourselves safe. Sometimes there is real danger. That's the thing. We don't want to go to the extreme of being in denial, but most of the time in these situations, actually the threat is not real, or the threat is a memory from the past. And when I was
ego, as you say, your ego is saying, hang on a second, that's not what we usually do. I don't like it.
We've been sold a myth that money keeps you safe. Like both, Elaine, you're talking, everybody's telling you that's a bad idea because you had a career, yeah? And because we've got this myth that money keeps you safe. My understanding is that money is a growth energy, and a growth energy by its nature is not safe. Anything that makes you grow makes you unsafe. And so we're living on this myth that money's safe, and I think a lot of people get that twist, or that like, don't break out, don't listen to this part of you that's next.
And it's
because of that money myth that money keeps you safe.
And from inside of us, and it's also like all the external, of not just the money, but even the profession, the success, the acceptable, And one of my colleagues once, when I was just getting close to leaving, said, like, so you're seriously leaving to go and teach people how to breathe? He's like, I've been working in like advanced physics and surgery for 20 years. You're going to really, and so when Fiona was speaking there about safety and boundaries, when I said that the word safety is often, perceived by some to be safe, not exciting, boring. The same is also true of boundaries. And the more we realize actually that when I'm speaking with groups about boundaries, I often say that once a guy walked into my workshop in London and we said, why are you here? What do you want to, experience today? And he said, I want to lose all my boundaries. Like that was some way of like, creating freedom. And I said to him, like, oh, you don't think you really want to do that, So often I use this model of like the safe zone, like the comfort zone, and like the growth area, like you're saying, and then the boundary here, and moving them up. But actually, if we throw ourselves from the safe zone straight over the edge of the boundary, we go into terror. And we have a bad experience and we contract back into the safety zone. So for growth and expansion and play, the boundaries are necessary. And there's that beautiful experiment they did with children where they had a school in a big, have you heard that one? A big set of land. And they build this school. It's got these huge fields and everything. And the children go out and they play like all around the side of the building. They don't really go very far at all. And then after a few months, they put a fence like far out on one of the field, and then the children like play.
Wow.
Up to the fence.
Wow.
So really, boundaries create the
expansive
possibility of play and learning and growth. Yeah, and like safety, they're essential to certainly to pleasure and to be able to relax and genuinely be and pleasure.
I love that. I can really visually see that and feel that. Yeah.
I have a friend who's an amazing nanny. Like she's like a super nanny. Yeah. And I had another friend who had a problem with a child biting. Like the children go through a biting thing. And so we asked like the super nanny, like, what do you do when there's a biting problem? And she was like, you bite the child back. You have to bite the child back. And she was just so straight up about it. And she's like, not hard, but you have to teach that child that boundary. Otherwise, the child will keep pushing. And she was like, the thing is if you don't give a child early on boundaries, you're going to have a problem teenager, because that teenager is going to be trying to find boundaries. And it's like it's like kids intuitively know that they need that fence in order to have the space to grow into. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And she was like, so many child development problems come from the boundaries not being clear, from the boundaries not. And as I'm saying this, I'm like, I wonder if like this kind of massive amount of trauma and stuff that people are processing now is because just not having a healthy understanding, being brought up by people who have a healthy understanding of boundaries, means that you can have a fairly ordinary childhood, but just not the right boundaries in order to feel safe.
And you're setting me off onto another topic, which I feel is related to this. Because also I think in groups, I find that boundaries are needed, in groups. Otherwise, people actually don't feel like there is a container. So in order to set a container to have process, whatever that is, there needs to be some. It could be very loose. It can be but something has to be set around, groups of people. But you remind me of this other thing that I often find people dancing with as individuals and as in society or in relation to others, which is this balance of sovereignty and being a sovereign being, and the rebellion, the rebel, which is a distortion actually of sovereignty, because in its form of the rebel, which is what that child is doing in some ways, is not true sovereignty. It's like a distortion, because where can we balance sovereignty with synergy? Where can I be in my sovereign self, but understand that I live in this house with other people and I have to work with other people. And, what's my capacity to stay in my own personal power, and be strong in my solar plexus and be part of a community or a relationship or something. And where do my needs and my sovereign right, where is that, always taking precedence, and then people become very selfish and inconsiderate of others. Mm-hmm. And whereas some people so passive and trying to please everyone all the time, at the extreme of distortion of synergy, where they actually then become resentful and feel like they're being walked over. So this journey around personal power, which is linked to the life force that we have. And if we are not able to, have a connection in the base, which creates a certain amount of safety, if we're not able, then no life force energy can move through this channel. And so in one of the experiences that I do with groups, people often want to be like doing energy work with other people, exchanging energy, playing with energy, doing stuff in their field. Love it, and it's great. But first, I always take people to what's your own inner channel? How able are you to connect with that system, whichever system you go to, the tantric system or the Taoist system or the Chinese medicine system, is your life force actually able to run through? And all of us have, challenges to that, from heartache, from stuff that affects our power and the solar plexus, stuff that affects our right to speak out. So really, for me, being in connection with your life force as a human being is really having access to how can I source and be connected to the earth, first of all, which is one of the biggest sources of power and energy. But also, as you see, where am I generating my own energy in my own system, and how can I move it through? Mm-hmm. And how connected is my life force? Because particularly working in sexuality, some people have great sexual energy. They're like full force here. Their heart's completely shut down. Mm. Or sometimes the opposite, or people who are massively spiritual, always having extreme transpersonal experiences, but don't know if they have enough money to feed and clothe themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about being in balance of that. It's about, letting it flow in between so you can find whatever that balance means to you.
And I feel like as you're describing this flow of life force energy, that solar plexus moment is like when you're winded. It's like, but you're not winded from air necessarily. You're winded from your life force energy being taken out of you. I feel like a lot of our trauma moments come from when that feeling that you described of the solar plexus being the place that is targeted.
Yeah.
Why we experience it so traumatically and often with a trauma response, like losing your voice or freezing, is because sudden loss of that flow of life force energy because of that particular incident. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it can happen to us in the heart, also equally strongly. It can happen to us when maybe we speak our truth and someone shuts us down or shames us, So in any of these places, but when we're speaking about personal power, then yes, it's like it's almost like someone cutting off the supply, someone taking that. And if we don't know how to clear our own internal system, if we don't know how to move energy so that when something does hit us somewhere, which of course it will, we're living human beings, we're never going to be over, being challenged. But how can we bring attention to that? How can we, I work a lot with emotional expression and emotional release. How can we move that energy out of the body, out of the energy field, so that actually flow can come back, and where if we don't circulate our own energy, and this is big time with sexual energy, so often people just build it and then, discharge it out the other person, or through masturbation, or it's this building of or receiving of energy and then just kind of short-circuiting it. Whereas actually part of the beauty of a lot of tantric and Taoist practices are, hey, where can I take that sexual energy and where can I actually use that, which for the purpose that it's meant to be used for also, which is to open that life force and bring energy to my creativity, bring energy to my power, bring energy to my heart, my intuition, my spiritual connection. If we don't notice that our life force is being, slowly cut off, very unhealthy relationships over long term, they start to kind of, rather than, they may wound, but they tend to actually almost like turning the gas down on the life force. And we have a job we hate or a relationship which is bad, we slowly start to wither in terms of our vitality, like in terms of our aliveness. And if it happens slowly, we might not even notice so much. So where, as I was saying the other day, for me, it's like, where do you fill up? How do you fill up? Do you consciously fill up? If you don't know how to do that, and you're just giving energy to others, trying to get back some life force via, trading, because you don't know how to keep your own life force replenished and healthy, then life is quite difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of want to sort of extend the conversation on from that, which is, I know something that we touched on at the end last time, and we didn't get the chance to talk about, but that is, when you talk about life force, we talk about energy, we talk about aliveness, but there's something very interesting to me about death and its relationship with life force, energy, and, what that means is that the end of our life force, or is it a different form of expression of that life force? I'm really curious. I know you've worked a lot in with people with grief and around death, and I'm really interested to understand your perspective of what happens to your life force in that moment. And
I also noticed that when you were talking about that shift in your life, you said, I was grieving.
Yeah. So,
because that, to just say, Elaine, that like that's where my change came from as well. I've had a real shift in the last 3 years, which was layered on top of a pretty big chunk of of grief that kind of seemed to continue for about 2 years, with losing various different people, but also grief in different other forms now I'm experiencing as well. It's not just that loss that we talk about specifically about someone passing away, but there's other types of grief that I realized had all kind of compounded on top of that. But that's, in that period, is where I've had the most profound spiritual upgrades, if you like, or understanding of myself and my beliefs have come off the back of that. So I understand.
It's a very common portal for people, it's a very common, I think sometime during lockdown, I did an online session for some festival called Death is My Teacher, but what my journey with it was actually, I have had people die close to me my entire life. Like one being my closest friend when I was 5 years old, like being hit by a car getting off the school bus, and then quite a number of people. And I didn't realize that it was unusual to know that many people that had died. Like by the time you're 20, I probably knew 7 or 8 people of my own age, not like all elderly relatives.
Wow.
Motorbike accidents, suicides. And I found it incredible when I first spoke to someone at university and they didn't know anyone that had ever died. And that actually continued for quite a few years. But I was 17 years old, working in a nursing home, the first time someone actually died while I was there, while I was like washing this person. And they started making this sound, and I just suddenly was like, okay, this is, and that moment of seeing like 1 minute this person's alive and the next minute the life force has gone out of them, and I had a sense of feeling like the body stopped, the heart stopped, the functions, and then I had a sense of this energetic, whatever you want to call it, part of this being. It was very slow, and in those years, because I worked in an elderly care home with a lot of people who were dying, there was a sense that sometimes it took some hours, sometimes I think it took longer, like this transition of these parts. So I had a very, like, early on imprint into the fact that, wow, our time is limited. We do die. And it could have made me very afraid of life, but it didn't. Fortunately, it made me very keen to live. It made me very aware that life is precious and it's not forever. And I see that part of the problem for a lot of the collective is actually a denial of the transientness of life and taking for granted that actually we're going to be here forever. And collectively we hide death, particularly in Western society. Whereas in some places in the world, it's much more open. The grief is much more open. The bodies are much more open. We've kind of sanitized death to be as particularly in the UK, when people at funerals, often, people get congratulated for not crying, well done, you did so well, so there's a lot of shame. So I was already on a big journey with this, and quite familiar with death. And then in 2010, my young brother committed suicide, and that was the grief that took me into like a very, very deep, dark place, and a whole load of aliveness and a decision to change my life. So what I understood then was there was this moment where I thought, I can stick on some plasters and keep going, or I can allow this grief to just crumble me. I can consciously think, I'm just going to fall apart. And as I did that, everything else in my life that I had never grieved, because there's lots of grief that we don't express, loss of this, loss of that, loss of opportunity, loss of happiness, loss of innocence. All of those things came rushing up behind going, oh, we're doing this now, are we? Me. My God, like this never ending thing. So it's a huge thing. And a little bit like one of my favorite books of all time is a book called The Prophet by Cahill Gibran. And he has this whole paragraph on joy and sorrow. And it says, like, remember, there's only enough space for joy as sorrow has carved out, and while one is eating at your table, the other is asleep in your bed. So for me, the reason that grief or extreme anger unlocks life again is we're so busy trying to keep ourselves neutral. We're busy trying to keep ourselves balanced, reasonable, not too emotional, not too angry, not too sad. And when something happens and it breaks through this barrier of control, and we get to feel the extremes of whatever it is we feel, it can reawaken the capacity for the emotionality, which is most often shut down. And then we can have actually more joy also. Seems ironic, but we then have more access, to the other areas. And we then often feel like, what am I waiting for? So I often speak with groups about death, and particularly saying, unless you really understand that one day you're going to die, you're never going to live.
I'm very moved by everything that you say. And I really resonate with it. Especially about, being next to death and holding that, like remembering that, like, life is temporary is how to live. There's some quite interesting channeled views on life force and death that kind of add to what you're saying, I believe. Which, my guides say when a soul dies, they hand their life force over to the living. So you actually get given life force, but especially family or souls that are very close. When they die, part of their death process is to hand the life force reserves that they didn't use to the souls that they loved. So you actually get an injection of life force energy when you're in a grief process. And it's like you get like extra supply. And so very often a death, especially of a close family member, will initiate an up level of your path, because you get this like flooding of life force energy as the soul is leaving, which is obviously quite an out there view, but I feel like it's worth mentioning it just because we're on May the Life Force be with you, and we're talking about everything from a life force point of view. And then also my guides say that grief is a process of reorientation. So they're like, you know, I've led a colourful life, and I've grieved some people that I didn't actually like very much. You know, like I've had some really difficult grieves of like, I had one recently actually where somebody that was deeply, gosh, this person was the beginning of my life as an adult in a very, very traumatic, unhealthy way, and the beginning of a lot of unhealthy patterns and all sorts of things, and, you know, was a nemesis to me. And she died this year. She died recently. And I hadn't seen her for 20 years. And I suddenly found myself in this grieving process of like, why am I grieving this person that like hasn't been in my life? And like, you know, and it was an interesting grief because there was relief and there was anger and there was all sorts of things. And I came back to this thing of like, because she was part of your orientation, and with her going, it's like that orientation, that story, that time and place and space version of you has now had the rug pulled out from under you. And so you're in this process of grief, which is also a flow of celebration. Like you say, it's connected to joy, and it's like the rug is out from under you. And so change, what I had with her was, I was like, you know, the timing of this is amazing because I'm actually working on these unhealthy patterns that were formed back when I was 16. Thank you, higher self of this person, because it's allowing me to then have the reorientation of, while she was alive, that orientation was always there, you know, and then she was gone and it was like, whoa, where am I? Who am I? I can reorientate out of this core belief and this story. Does that make sense? But the life force injection to me is really interesting. It's like,
do you remember doing a call with me?
I do. We did it.
We did it live in 2019. So between 2010 and 2019, all of my immediate family members passed, all the very dramatic, difficult, self-destructive kind of things, apart from my mother, who has Alzheimer's, so she's here and she's not here. And as part of that journey, I was in Bali, and I had a kidney stone that got lodged in my kidney. And I've never had a kidney stone, no risks for kidney stone. And when I got that, I got a call to say that my then stepfather, who had dementia and who was in the same home as my mother, was becoming unwell and was probably going to be dying in the next few weeks. And I got out of hospital. The stone was still there. They were telling me to try and like jump up and down to get it to come out on its own. They wanted to do that for 3 weeks. Couldn't fly. And I did a session online with you. And we connected with his soul. We connected with stuff around the lineage of, you know, because 2 years before that, his daughter, my stepsister, died, and his son was heading the same way at that time. And I remember doing the session with you, and there was this thing where he was almost offering me this part of his life force. But it came with a stipend that he wanted me to process the pain from like his lineage, from his family's lineage. And I remember we were online for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours or something.
Yeah, it was a profound session.
And when I came off that call, 15 minutes later, I got a message to say he'd passed. They thought he was going to live maybe a couple of weeks. And, I'm mindful of who I share that with, because some people might think these kind of stories mean that we're like seriously unstable and a bit crazy in some ways, because it's very, very, intense, and in some ways unbelievable to the kind of logical academic minds that we have. But that was, for me, like the clearest personal experience that I had of that. And it was interesting to be in the situation of like, do I want this life force? Yeah. If it comes with that caveat, you know, and is it one thing just to process and feel those things that you haven't felt or that were not felt? Maybe I'm a yes to that. If it means in any way me taking any of that on or holding into or taking that into my life, then I'm a no to that. But that was like one of the most incredible. And it took me a few weeks. I had to go in and have surgery eventually to get this stone moved. But he's the only person in my family that has ever had a kidney stone, and I'm not biologically related to him, and yet I had a kidney stone.
The magic of death, like.
I trust and believe all of that. I really do. I do.
And it feels like it's so important to have in the conversation that maybe life force, maybe, I'm not going to say scientifically, but certainly energetically, I have had an experience. You've had an experience. I'd love to hear your experience, Fiona, that maybe life force can be inherited, in which case there needs to be some kind of hygiene ceremony way. Otherwise, what are you inheriting? Like you so wisely say, Elaine, do you actually want this life force that is being generously given, or do you want to filter it? Do you want to work with, do you want to go on some sort of ceremonial grief process? Because if life force is inherited, it's really a problem that we're not talking about that in society.
And there's also this piece which I became aware of in all of their deaths, actually, that was particularly strong with my brother and my stepsister, because I was particularly close to them, was like feeling a sense of, because they had quite, untimely and difficult deaths, the time or their transition out from, like, my understanding of their soul and their body and their essence, and the transition was very difficult and painful and scary for them. So there was a number of days where I felt like I was mainly meditating, sitting with them, feeling, and again, my more scientific friends would probably call me crazy, but in some holding and helping of them, witnessing of them, to allow them to cross over. Particularly, I remember my stepsister, I had this sense that there was so much fear in her and so much lack of trust, because in life, a lot of her trust had been broken. So this thing of like trusting to just let go into going on to wherever her essence was traveling on to, created like almost like a freeze of this part. So physically, she had died. But like for those 2 or 3 days when I was in connection with the energetic of her and her being, it was like she'd almost gone into like this, like a traumatic freeze, because of lack of trust to let go and feel safe to,
It's a lack of safety. We've come full circle. Fiona, I'd love to hear about we've both just shared about death and path, and I know that you've been through massive grief. Do you resonate?
Well, yeah, I've gone from the solar plexus to the throat chakra to very much my heart now. Like my heart is just aching, like listening to all of that. I don't really know what I would add specifically, other than maybe a couple of things, and that is when I found out that when we found out my dad was terminally ill. It was just before lockdown, and we had a choice goes into a hospice, and we never see him again, or we'll bring him home and we'll look after him together. And so that's what my sister, my mum, and I decided we'd do. But we never told my dad he was ill. We let him believe he was coming home because he was getting better. We forbid any carers, the doctors, for telling him, because he had a real fear of death. And there was just certain things he just never talked about. And he just never wanted to accept it. He never wanted to talk about it. So we thought it'll just put him into a spiral of fear, and he'll be anxious, and that will make him unwell. So we'll just not tell him, and we'll just create this lovely environment, thank you very much, COVID, where we can all be together in the same house for the first time in 27 years. And he would just look at us at 3:00 in the morning when we were up, as he's wandering around the house, and he'd say, "What are you doing here?" And we'd just blame it on Nicola Sturgeon not letting us leave the country. So it was this beautiful place of safety that, he had all these girls around him. Then he was given 3 weeks, and he actually was with us for 7 months. And it was an amazing experience of having that. There's no other time in our lives that an environment like that could have been created where we all just had to be there together. And so it allowed me to have this time with my dad, knowing obviously what the end outcome was like, but it was like a role reversal. It's like we're looking after the child and we're the parent again. But what's really interesting is I got to experience that whole death process, and it is a process. In the same way we come out, if we're lucky enough to go peacefully and not suddenly, and you see how your body changes and your mind changes. And he would talk a lot about his childhood. He talked a lot about his father, his mother, and experiences about playing football and all this kind of stuff, like he was a child again. And there's a couple of things that I'll just touch on, but there's that I'll come back to on that and my belief about what happened when he passed. But he was talking about his dad one day, and his dad passed when he was 19, so I'd never met him. And it was 3:00 in the morning because he loved to get up throughout the night. I'm sitting there going, please just go back to bed. And he was talking about his dad. And then all of a sudden, my dad just looked down at where he was sitting, and he had this shock on his face. And he picked up this piece of paper, which I'd never seen in my entire life before. And it was a luggage tag that had his dad's name and the old address where he lived as a boy. And he looked at me completely shocked. And he's like, where did this come from? And I had goosebumps everywhere going, I have no idea where that came from. But that is my grandfather's name. And that's the house he used to live in Baillieston. And I have no idea how those two things came together. But we both just looked at each other and went, oh my gosh, and had this moment together. Knowing my dad, he was probably playing with me. And even in his crazy time, he'd probably planted it there 2 days later to play that joke on me. But I was like, wow, show me a signier sign. But what I realized as I watched my dad talk more and more about his childhood and calling his mum and dad is that when he passed, I believe that wherever he went, wherever his soul went, to whoever he was calling on, he appears to them in that form. So he's my dad to me. He's my mum's young husband. He's the 8-year-old boy to his parents. You are and you appear to those that you love in however the memory is that they hold of you. And so he's not passing on in the same way that I think he is as the physical body now. He's the embodiment of whatever that joyful time and that connection time with all the people that were important to him. And that's what I got a sense of as I was there. And other than just to be absolutely profoundly grateful, which sounds a really crazy thing to say, to have the privilege to be with someone as they pass, it's like it changes your life forever and gives you a completely different perspective, or it did for me, a completely different perspective on absolutely everything. To have that utter privilege to be with someone, because I know from 2 of my cousins that passed the same year as my dad, we didn't have that. They went really suddenly and unexpectedly, and there was no one with them. And I think there is a different type of relationship you have with that person after they go because of the nature of that death, and if you were there with them. And I know, Elaine, you said that there was a big difference of that first time you were with someone and how that felt. So that's just my Sorry, it was just rambling. I didn't really know
Not
where
rambling. I love
the things, I could talk for days on the other things. Because one other quick little thing, it wasn't a kidney stone, but a week after I'd moved back down to England after he passed, I kind of got playful and I was like, come on then, Dad, show me a sign. Come on then. I'm into all this stuff now. And I was walking down a street in Hove. I never walked down. And I looked in this window about 10 seconds after I'd said that. And there were these 2 yellow love hearts in the window. One said Dad and the other said Alex, which is my dad's name. And I was like, okay, got it. Thanks for the sign, Dad. And I was just, so I look for the magic now in the day, and I'm curious for the magic. And I think that's one of the things that it's taught me, to be a little bit more playful, a little bit lighthearted, and not look for the fear and the grief, which I used to.
I love that you said that, of everything you said, but like literally, I was bringing through some guidance yesterday. Somebody asked about mediumship on my course in channeling. And what was coming through is that mediumship is when you connect to the realm where the personality of the self goes. And so you connect to the spirit in personality form rather than in a different form. And what the guides were saying was that death process takes for every single person that knew you to be dead. Because only then are you able to transcend that level.
So do you mean like when I saw my dad as all the different versions?
Yeah. So like what they were saying is like the personality self stays in that realm, processing, karmaing, sorting out, realigning, until there is nobody left that remembers who you were when you were alive. There is no actual physical memory left. That's the time. So if you think
you're completely...
And so it's kind of like what you just said. It's like the memories keep that person, that personality there in that realm.
Right.
Until, and then the soul has another transition when the last person dies, which, if you think about it, if you die at 96 and there's a child that remembers you that's 3, it's a long time. It's a long time that particular karmic, akashic realignment, energetic process goes on for.
Very interesting.
Isn't it?
And when you were saying, Fiona, about, you look for the play and the fun, one thing I think that I always try and remember, and I always try and say to people, for those who are not aware or who've forgotten, is like at any one moment, everything is available to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's often where we choose to focus our attention. So particularly also, again, this is a tool for working with pleasure, where some people are a bit addicted to the pain body or to sadness, or grief is really easy. For other people, eroticism is really easy because they want to avoid. But if we understand that actually everything is there, and like, where are we focusing our attention? Where are we pointing and keeping our attention? Where are we getting stuck, in one end of one experience? And it's definitely true that for me and people I've worked with, that, the sudden death and long illness are 2 very different kind of experiences to have with regards to the grief. And one is not easier than the other. They both have like their different challenges, as you say, not having time to complete with people, not having time to say goodbye. And on the other side, not having to watch someone you love, sometimes suffer and sometimes be in pain. So there's these different types of grief. And also what you were saying, Clara, around your orientation, because this is one of the biggest things I realized when everyone around me started to disappear from my immediate family. I was like, there's no one who knows me and was with me all through my childhood, like who knows the whole kind of string. And so as difficult as some of these deaths were, I also could see where I had less responsibility. I had less of the imprints of being the person that I was meant to be in the family constellation. Like where where does actually, I would still rather they were all alive, but given that they're not, where do I look at where the actual a freedom in me from actually no longer, or maybe not even just a freedom as an opportunity to find more and more authenticity and less who I am in the eyes of others and who I've become in relation to others. So I think that, death of people close to us can sometimes really give us this thing of feeling like, who the hell are we? And there definitely was sometimes. I was having a lot of awakening, a lot of downloads, a lot of stuff going on. And some days I was like waking up like, I don't know who I am today. I don't know who I am today. And without these markers very close to you, constantly reminding you and resetting and maybe retuning you back into your position in the constellation, it was like, whoa, this can be exciting and terrifying, actually, both at the same time. An opportunity to really change and grow and transform in yourself, and the potential to completely lose it because you have like no reference point anymore for, because so often our perception of who we are is who we are in relation to others rather than actually who we are, in ourselves. And the thing you said about the ages really reminded me. I had this with both my brother and with my stepsister. I had a lot of dreams about them in the times after they died. And sometimes initially they were very, very regular, and then they would become less regular. And I have crazy dreams all the time, and I don't follow them and I don't record them. And friends of mine who work with lucid dreaming tell me, hey, you should be writing them down. Mm-hmm. And my usual response is, there's enough going on in my waking world to do it. And I don't want to start delving in. I trust that if I'm meant to learn things and know things, I will learn. But two of the dreams I had, both of them was on occasion, not both together, but separately, where I was in a room and I looked and I saw them at like 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old. It was like there was these bodies, and these bodies turned around, and there was the faces of my brother the first time I had the dream at like all these different ages and all these different stages. And a few years later, the same happened in a dream with my sister, and it was almost like I remember all of who you are, like, and how that was connected to where they were in whatever transition they were in. I don't know, but also as part of the grief process, often the dream world becomes, very significant.
I had a very, very detailed dream about my cousin who passed just last night. And it was, I'm going to write it down because it stayed with me all day. You know how sometimes you can't, but there was definitely something in that.
What I have to say, I don't want this conversation to end. And there is so much life and death and magic and wisdom in it. It has to end. Hopefully you will be back on May the Life Force be. There's so many places I want to go with you, like. But hopefully you will be back again.
What a beautiful conversation, though, and thank you for opening us up to talk about death. I agree with you. I think it's so important, and I believe that we should talk about it and the grief process more. So thank you for allowing us that opportunity to talk about it. Because it's important. It's important.
Yeah. Also, I'd like to say that whoever inherits your life force is going to be very, very lucky. Like, you are leaving them some clean ass, powerful, circulating, healthy life force energy. And I feel like, this conversation has slightly inspired this thing in me of like, I actually, matters to caretake of it for your next generations as well. And I feel like the work you do helps so many people leave better life force energy for the next generations. And
the last thing I want to say, because I was going to say and then we'll complete. Another thing I think is super important is to actually, for those who recognize and who want to, obviously, is to practice conscious shamanic death, to practice conscious ritual death processes, to go into those, because actually I've had so much of my growth, death, learning, unlearning, evolution has been due to processes of those types of deaths, because in those types of deaths we can have the chance while we're still alive to let those things die. And so some people may use plant medicines to do that. Some people may use breath work. Some people may use rebirthing. But really, if you can get into a practice, there's one statement someone made, wasn't it, somewhere about dying every day, you know, but with that kind of idea, if this was my last day, or if and you can change a lot with conscious ritual death processes. And if people are interested in death, there's an amazing network called the Death Cafe, which which I have a few friends of mine that are holders of those cafes. And also now I've met a few death doulas. Yeah, and this is another area, you know, of things around death.
I have a friend who's a death doula. She's very special. She helped me a lot through my grieving process.
Yeah, so it is becoming more to our consciousness, and as we say that, I feel like there's many reasons for why we have that relationship, and just sitting with, you know, all the death that's happening unconsciously, and it's almost like, because so much unnecessary, it's very sad death is happening all over our television screens, all over the world around us. It's like shutting us down to actually coming back to like our own mortality. So it's like where for me, the collective shadow, it's the same with all the kind of sex offenses and the pedophile things, whereby if we're not as individuals processing and owning the parts that we need to process in our own shadows, then the collective starts to express in extreme violence or extreme forms of unhealthy patterns. And that's another kind of shamanic perspective of looking at.
I would love to talk, if you were brave enough to talk shadow and the deep collective shadow on May the Life Force with you at some point, because like I agree, and it's the conversation that the collective, to bring it right back to the beginning, especially when it comes to kind of the big things like death and pedophilia and stuff like that, the collective does that voiceless solar plexus freeze response that we were speaking about at the beginning of what this incredible mountain of a conversation is. And so I'm going to ask you to come back, not in the same week, but like, just keep talking to Elaine. Thank you, though.
Wow, yes, thank you, Elaine.
You're amazing, and we're so grateful.
And my life force is definitely topped up. Thank you.
I'm so glad we were able to actually hear you, and thank you for sharing everything you shared. Yeah, thank you both. I'm so glad that I happened to have time this week to talk to you twice, and I look forward to having them and sharing them, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who could do with plugging into your podcast.
Thank you so much. May the life force be with you and the people that are going to inherit it from you. I mean, you know, that conversation, it had so much energy. So much energy. The internet was going, everything was going. It was like this storm of a conversation that was coming into the space even before it was there.
I'm so glad we got the chance to do part 2.
I'm so glad you got a chance to speak. And thank you, because you were so vulnerable, you know, like throughout that whole conversation, I was like, wow, Fiona is in the power of her vulnerability from the beginning, because like we were challenging you. We were talking about your solar plexus, your voice being taken. Then you're talking about like grief and the last days with your dad. I mean, it was just, yeah.
I know. And as I said, you know, and said to Elaine, just deep appreciation to be able to have the time, the space, the platform to be able to talk about death. It's so important. It really is. And And, she has such an interesting perspective, and oh my gosh, to have had so much loss so early.
So much.
Incredible. And how that's shaped her life,
So much. And then, to be able to, she also shared so vulnerably about, she even said, I don't normally speak about this because of, and I was like, well, now you do. And then, to be sharing that amazing process that she went through with the death of her stepfather and the kids, it was just such a profound conversation that really went to the edge of life and went into the afterworld and then came back to power and then came to sexual energy and came to, how there was so much early on in that conversation as well, because it was long, but everything she was saying about, how the solar plexus gets activated into.
I'm feeling it in my throat chakra again. I'm feeling that conversation in all places that I was feeling it before. We get re-triggered, we get activated. Do you know what I loved as well? And gosh, it's a whole other conversation, but it's the conscious shamanic death.
Yeah.
That she mentioned. So, that's not a phrase I'm familiar with, but the principle of it I completely understand, which is throughout your life and circumstances, and we all change. Gosh, if we stayed the same from the day we were born, we'd be pretty bloody weird. So of course we change and we evolve, but that letting go and releasing and grieving certain parts of your life, and that, that sense of loss, but having ceremony and acceptance to that is so important, so that when you move forward, you're not dragging all of this other stuff with you all the time. It's something I'd like to explore. Maybe
I know people that can help you do that. We can sort you out.
Yes, let's have another conversation about that.
Oh no, I'd love to. I also loved the when she was talking about boundaries and how your safety needs edge, but then needs a boundary and then needs the fence, and how your play and, your grief is carving out space for your joy. It was just deliciously expansive, and yet so, as Elaine is, so practical, so making these kind of big concepts something that actually
she's lived it. That's
yeah,
right. She's experienced. She comes from that science space into the mystic world and the magic, and so it's very relatable and it's very authentic because it comes from her experience and journey. Loved it. Oh my goodness me. Well, another beautiful conversation that we never know where it's going to go. So wow. I hope everybody has enjoyed it, and we'll catch you soon.
May the life force be with you. We hope this conversation has topped up your life force energy. If it has, then please help us spread the life force. Like, share, subscribe, all of that. And may the life force be with all of us.